Hi everyone, we're going to start I think. So I have the enviable task of introducing Jolie. So welcome everyone to this evening's book launch for the girl who will rule the world. My name is David, and me and Tarek, who some of you might know, run the Marlborough Theatre upstairs, and we share an office with Jolie, who's very lovely to share an office with. And her company Career Arts is based here. And so we're soon going to be hearing from the lady herself, but here is some interesting biographical details about Jolie. She was born in Colchester in 1978, and Jolie Booth grew up in Braintree in Essex, and she escaped and survived and studied a degree in English at Nottingham Trent University. She's lived in Brighton for 15 whole years, which is ages, as well as in Sydney, Australia, Nottingham, London, and the squats of Berlin, where she ran the infamous Fischladen squat bar in the Friedrichshain before returning to Brighton. In her first published novel, The Girl Who Ruled the World, we follow the story of a young woman finding her way in a tumultuous world through a broken narrative and stream of consciousness. This novel is the first in a planned series of books called Saturn Returns, in which the reader will return every 7 years to the world of the heroine Esmeralda, dipping into her life and discovering how it and her ideals have changed. The first book in the series is set in Brighton between 2006 and 2007, during which time Esmeralda turns from 27 to 28 years old and tells the story of a young woman facing her 30s with a feeling that she is undoubtedly going to take over the world. And on that note, I'd like you to give a massive hand to Jolie Booth.
Not that tall. Right. Okay. Thank you all for coming tonight and welcome to this, my book launch. I am a published author! This really is a dream come true, and one that I thought for the first 35 years of my life was never going to happen. This is 10 years in the making, so it's pretty extraordinary that this has actually come to pass. I'm less nervous about tonight than I am about any of you actually reading it. So, first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking the Marlborough for hosting this evening and for David for introducing me. So, a big round of applause to the Marlborough, please. I'd also like to thank all my friends and family who've been supporting me on what has sometimes been a rocky journey. I'd like to thank those who read my book 10 years ago, because it was your feedback and support that helped it become the book it is now. And especially to the young women who read the book in the last couple of years and then urged me on to try and get it published, because without them, it wouldn't be here today. So a big round of applause to them, please. I'd like to thank my friend Daisy Fitzsimmons, who did the arduous task of actually proofing my early draft of the book, and for all her love and support. So thank you, Daisy. Huge round of applause to her. She's at the back. I would like to thank my friend Buffy. She can't be here with us this evening, but she introduced me to Steve, and he's my publisher. I'd also like to thank Steve Rudd and the King's England Press for taking a risk in supporting an author from what is known as the slush pile. That's people who just send in their texts without being asked to. I'm over the moon at having had this opportunity. And I love these guys forever for taking the risk of publishing me. So a huge round of applause to the publishers. I'd also like to thank Steve for introducing me to Rachel Beaumont, who helped me to edit my text into the book you see before you today. That looks like this. Talking to Rachel over Skype was the first time I'd ever discussed my work from a literary viewpoint, and she literally sent chills down my spine with her feedback and insights. I'd also like to thank Mish for designing this beautiful book. She's literally like the designer of my life. She did my tattoo, and she's just, we've been on this journey together. So thank you so much for everything you've ever done. Mwah, love you. And last of all, I would like to thank my diligent husband, who is never, That's him. He's diligent. He's never, ever, ever allowed to read this book. Ever. Okay? So no one talked to him about it. No one discussed anything with him. But he's been here supporting me every step of the way. And he's always a stand for me being the biggest and brightest I can possibly be. So thank you so much. I love you. So, introducing the girl who ruled the world. I guess the first question is, what the hell is it all about? Ridiculously, this is actually the hardest question to answer. And you think of all people I'd know. I tell you what it says on the back. As with an impressionist painting, where the image appears from the dots, the story of Esmeralda emerges from the chaos of writing, revealing a 21st century woman trying to make sense of a world gone mad. Do you know what I mean by the impressionist paintings? There's that famous one of the bathers on the banks of a river, and it's by, I've written down his name, George Seurat. When you're close to it, you can't actually see the image, it's just lots of little coloured dots, but when you stand back, you can see the picture. And this is written in a similar vein. It's lots of little snippets. So when you're reading the book, at first, the story doesn't really kind of become clear until you've read the whole book, and then you can see what the story is, sort of. You see, this book came about from me writing down lots of ideas, sentences, thoughts, jokes, and things that people had said. They began sticking to my brain like post-it notes. I began writing them all down and had a sense that I might want to start writing a book. But I had no plot in mind and I had no plan of action. But rather than worrying about that, I decided to just keep writing down the snippets that were sticking, with a view to later sifting through them and seeing if there was something tangible in there that I might like to develop further. But then the snippets became a few pages, then 10, then 20, then 36, and that's the first chapter of this book. It just turns out that that's the way I like to write. And it makes sense. I've been keeping a diary since I was 8 years old, and throughout my childhood I collected bits and bobs from special moments in my life and put them together into scrapbooks. So this text is kind of a scrapbook of 2006 and 2007. This style of writing is called stream of consciousness, and apparently it's quite a difficult style to write in. I find it really easy. I studied English literature at university, and my favourite subject was postmodernism. The postmodernists believe in the deconstruction of the grand narrative. This is the narrative that gives mankind, and I mean mankind, a safety line through all the chaos. It's a one-size-fits-all narrative. You're born, you go to school, you go to university, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you retire, you die. Wicked. That is a grand narrative. God is also a grand narrative, and also the world according to what Grayson Perry refers to as the default man. White, middle-class men in suits. The grand narrative is pretty much their narrative. It's solid, linear, like a skyscraper or a pillar, or, yeah, a bit like a big cock. Whereas postmodernists played around with the narrative. They wanted to challenge the reader's trust in the narrator. Rather than being this omniscient figure that they thought knew all, they wanted you to question who this person really is that's telling you these things and what is happening. In this book, I'm sort of Esmeralda and I'm sort of the narrator, but I'm also neither. Just like some of the things said in the dialogue were things that I really said in real life, or things that other people really said in real life, and I've stolen them and attributed them to either me or someone else. So there's a really good chance, if you've known me since 2006, that at some point whilst you're reading this book, you're going to hear your voice like a wormhole from the past and hear the exact words you once said. But it might not be attributed to a character that seems like you, and I might even claim that I said it myself. So. Rather than a grand narrative, this is a patchwork narrative. It's got bits and pieces with messy bits that are hard to get through, smooth bits that are easy. There are hidden folds and secret places and bits that just don't make sense, and yeah, it's a bit like a vagina. But what's it about? Okay, it's about coming of age. Esmeralda is 27 years old when the book starts and turns 28 during the course of it. She's she's aware that she'll be turning 30 soon and is beginning to think about what kind of woman she's becoming and if she's completely comfortable with the picture that she can see before her. She's single for much of it and is trying to work out what kind of partner she wants to settle down with, if she decides to settle down at all. Esmeralda is an opinionated and outspoken little so-and-so, and she's not overly impressed with the way the world is going. After putting this book down for 10 years and letting it to ferment, the delightful thing about reading it again was that I received feedback and advice from my younger self. I'd forgotten how clear-sighted I'd been back then, when right and wrong had been more black and white, and when my feelings of the world were a little less jaded. It says here, Esmeralda is no girly girl. She's a mean, not very lean shagging machine. Her body's not a temple, it's a skip. That's the reason why my husband can't read it. There is a lot of sex in there. And she's enjoying herself. Her sex is coming from a good place, not a damaged place, but from a space of enjoyment. My friends and I came up with a theory once that Brighton is full of women who were tomboys at school, the kind of girls that didn't like other girls and hung out with the guys. But then we all moved to Brighton and discovered that other women can be awesome too. And Esmeralda is one of those women. She drinks pints, enjoys sex, likes drugs, and doesn't see how any of it's really a problem if it's not hurting anybody else. Which is why I don't feel like this is strictly an autobiographical book. I think this book is a cheer for all the women out there who were tomboys at school. And it feels like any one of the many precocious warrior women I know in Brighton could be Esmeralda. Now, because the book is stream of consciousness, it's actually very hard for me to find a bit that works on its own for a reading. So I've decided to just read you the opening couple of pages because they've actually, it will warm you up for the full Monty, but also it's got the least obscenities in it. Still pretty green. Okay, I'm going to take a sip of water. Squeeze in if you can. There's booze there as well. People have Prosecco, there's loads.
Shall I go?
No, this is okay. It's okay. Right. I've picked the least rude bit for you. Okay. Could you pass me, Anne? Could you pass me one? Okay. Right, listen. Esmeralda woke to the alarm on her mobile phone. It was 9:30 a.m. and she had been in the thick of a particularly vivid and prophetic dream, but the memory of it now slipped out of her mind like a well-spent member. She lay for a moment gathering her thoughts, watching the small black flies continually circling her lampshade, and tried to recall the reason for setting her alarm. Her room was dark, it always was. Only a pathetic trickle of light ever made it through the window from the lofty heights of the courtyard that her room backed onto. Every surface in the courtyard was dripping in pigeon shit, and the pigeons themselves squatted honestly in their own faeces, winking at Esmeralda through the window panes with their yellow, beady eyes. So this house is a real house that I did live in with some of my closest male friends who are very kindly here today. Hello. It was a beautiful Regency house right on Marine Parade, and we had gorgeous bay windows and the high Regency ceilings. It was lovely, it was him. And I loved living there with these guys. It was one of the best houses I've ever lived in. But unfortunately my room did just back onto a courtyard full of pigeons and pigeon poo, and I still hate pigeons to this day. She wondered if it was her name that had led her to a penchant for ugly but intriguing men. She always found amusement in people's inability to perceive parallel universes. "They're everywhere you look," she commented idly, watching a bird and a butterfly partaking in a dogfight, "and are as clear as the end of your nose." "But the end of your nose is a blur," he said. "Good point." "I was just telling everyone how you are the light of my life," he told her as he answered the phone. "Oh, why, thank you," she replied. "I've decided I'm going to write a book." I remember asking my tutor when I was at secondary school if he could tell me where I'm supposed to use a comma. He told me wherever it felt right. She looked introspective for a moment before concluding, "I didn't go to a very good school." I really didn't. I went to a bloody awful school, and that's why I'm so proud to actually have produced a book and have a book that's been published. And if anything, it proves that bloody anyone can do it. So if any of you out there feel like you've got a book in you, just do it, because it's perseverance and just sticking in there. Everyone's got a story to tell. So yeah, if you think you might be able to do it, do it. I don't like non-committal punctuation marks, especially the semicolon. That girl's got custody tendencies, noted Esmeralda. As much as we try, we can't escape from Mother Nature. We box ourselves in and try to make it feel safe, but she's always there, cooing at the window and doing figures of 8 around the lampshade at the centre of our world. She was impressed that the computer's spell and grammar check insisted Mother Nature was spelt with capitals in the same way that God is. iPod sounds a bit like God. Language is so patriarchal. The linear formulations of thoughts and feelings. Box it off, segregate it and understand it. Fuck that for a laugh. Excuse my language. Esmeralda dragged herself out of bed, wrapped herself up in a blue toweling dressing gown and grabbed her Faith in Nature lavender and geranium shampoo and conditioner. Being the only girl in a house full of boys meant that she was the only one who ever bought toiletries, so she had to keep them squirreled away in her room. And besides, if the boys did ever buy toiletries, they were always the big brand types or the dirty cheap variety, both of which were full of harmful chemicals that Esmeralda decided she wanted to avoid. Her shampoo was free of SLES. Esmeralda didn't know what SLES was, but she was certain she didn't want it in her shampoo. But she was happy to ply her body with harmful chemicals all weekend. But not in the safety of her own shower, thank you very much. I still have no idea what SLES is. She marched into the bathroom, took off her dressing gown and began to run the hot water tap. She pulled off her pyjama bottoms, went to the loo, and then set about the highly skilled art of balancing the taps. She was the only one in the house who had perfected the technique of nurturing the water flow to the exact temperature between freezing cold and scalding hot. The boys in the house either had to have baths or freezing cold showers, which was Jamie. Once it was running to her satisfaction, Esmeralda stripped off her pyjama top and climbed into the shower. She washed her hair with a shampoo and then conditioned it with a conditioner. Then she used the shampoo to wash her body. No one had bought soap in an age. She lathered up under her armpits and shaved them. Then she lathered up between her legs and shaved her bikini line. She can never decide one way or the other about her bikini line. Half the men... Sorry, put your finger in your ears, Emily. Half the men she shagged were the kind of men who expected shaved bikini lines, and the other half were the kind who advocated the natural look. But Esmeralda had an obsession with preening, and she could never resist the urge of neatening up her pubes, even though she never bothered shaving her legs. Plus, she hated hairy bumholes. She couldn't stand the thought of someone doing her from behind and being distracted by what looked like a spider trying to escape from her asshole. After shaving, she rinsed down, turned off the taps, dried and returned to her room. The whole procedure had taken less than 15 minutes. Bridget Jones can kiss my spotty arse. Yes, there you go. It's not really very delicate, but it's not subtle. So, that gives you a bit of an idea of the flavour of things. I do hope, though, that... and that's the gentler pages. I hope that within these pages, though, there are moments of goldly flutterings of truths hidden amongst the lurid quagmire of Esmeralda's life. I think at times it will make you laugh out loud. It might make you cry, but I hope it makes you think. And also that, for the people that this was really written for, the kind of people who fit into Brighton and feel they understand Esmeralda when they're reading this book, that this is a window also into their own lives. And I hope they feel liberated by a moment of visibility, because this window is becoming increasingly narrow in the world we live in today. I say in this book that I worry that one day the words I write might even be used against me. I'm actually more scared of this now than I was 10 years ago. We need to make ourselves visible to prove that the grand narrative is just one narrative amongst millions. We are each our own little universe, living in parallel to one another, but each one quite unique. By cutting ourselves off from each other, we are missing out on so many experiences and flavours. People are coming and going all the time, and we must make time to stop and listen to each other's stories, because each life is fleeting, and we only have moments before the person shuts the gateway to their universe they are guarding forever. We have all of eternity to hang out in our own realms. So thank you for taking an interest in my universe, and I hope you enjoy sticking your head through the window of this book and having a good old nose. Thank you all very much.